This time around, we have a unique, wacky, crazy, I don't know what to call it, river situation. We're going to get there by breaking the hand down as it goes. Enjoy the ride. It's pretty great.
This hand was suggested to us by Is It Anubis on YouTube. If you have a suggestion for us, tweet at us.
The blinds are 40,000 and 80,000 with a 5,000 ante. And action's on Kent Lundmark. The Swede will fold. The Russian, Konstantin Puchkov, will fold his queen 4. Charlotte de Vries gives up queen 8. So Giuseppe Pantaleo on the button with jack 8 offsuit. He's an experienced tournament player. Says he plays cash as well, but says he's quite bad in ring games. He's had a good tournament so far. A very aggressive player, this hand being no exception, makes it 165,000, gets Tor Stung to fold the small blind. Lizano looking interested in the big blind with jack 10 of hearts.
This is a good hand to call and see a flop.
So 2 big stacks go to the flop. And the flop is queen high. Nothing for either player.
This is a fairly safe flop to continuation bet. This only hits a queen and a club flush draw. He can bet and take it down. Or he can think about it and check back.
Another queen comes on the turn. It's also a third club. And Lizano feels like he can steal it.
Giuseppe slowed down on the flop. Jesus is going to take a stab.
230,000.
Well, again, Giuseppe's going to think about this.
We saw him happily float against Chandra de Vries.
Yup, and it looks like that's what's going to go on here. Giuseppe has a cunning plan in store. He's going to float this turn with nothing to try to win this pot on the river.
It is a cunning plan for sure, William Reynolds, and thanks for calling it that.
William Reynolds, you are the weirdest commentator in poker history. The way he talks just is, that's not what we're here for.
No, let's get into the actual stuff, because it's
All right.
cool.
So what is Giuseppe doing here? This is a very interesting play. First of all, he checks back on the flop. Everything pre-flop is super standard, especially considering the stack sizes.
Yeah.
So checking back on the flop, what is Giuseppe trying to do there?
Well, normally he'd be representing marginal showdown value, like a pair under the queen, ace high, something like that.
Sometimes he could also have a queen that he does not want to get check raised with, or that he feels that he can get more value with later.
That's true, but mostly he's going to bet his queens. Mostly.
Yeah, especially because there are 2 clubs.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's not a huge part of his range, but I do think a lot of good players do have top pair and check back range.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
I certainly do.
Yeah.
So, anyway, he's deciding, obviously, that he's not giving up, that he's got a big plan for later when he checks back on the flop, because calling on the turn is not a standard thing to do.
No, not at all. It's I'm going to win this pot by hook or by crook, damn it. That's what seems to be going on.
Let's talk a little bit about why Giuseppe decides to just call on the turn if he wants to win the pot. Because
Okay.
when you look at it, immediately what jumps out is, well, you have to raise. You only have jack high, right?
Right, but you
we
can't.
break it down on the podcast. Raising would be, honestly, a terrible play.
There's almost nothing Giuseppe can represent here because it's the queen of clubs on the turn. So he just wouldn't be raising trip queens now. And he almost never has a flush because he's going to bet almost all of his flush draws on the flop, just like he's going to bet almost all his queens on the flop. So the only things he'd ever be raising, we would think, would be trip queens or better. And he just doesn't really have almost any of those things in his range.
He doesn't even raise trip queens because the flush
Right.
came in, and
You're right.
now the queen is beat by the top end of Lozano's value
Fair enough.
range.
You're
and
right.
Giuseppe really doesn't want to put himself in that spot. If he was playing a queen for pot control / deception on the flop, he's definitely not raising it on this turn where a queen can now be beat despite his improvement nominally.
Agree 100%. So he's raising maybe flushes. That's all he can really rep, right?
Right,
I mean,
and-
maybe
but
a
it's-
full house once in a while of like pocket sixes.
We go into the
I don't know.
podcast about his range a bit more, but also it's so likely that he bets sets on this flop due to the wet nature of the board, semi-wet nature of the board, and the fact that his opponent could easily have a queen as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is Lizano can have any of this. Lizano much more reasonably has trip queens or a flush here. and Pantaleo almost never does.
They both have the same hand. Queens and deuces with a jack kicker.
The aggressor will probably win this pot.
Lizano is not shut down. He bets a second time.
And Giuseppe's reaching for chips. It looks like his plan is falling into place. He's going to raise Jesus off this chop pot.
Makes it 790,000. If Jesus thinks Pantaleo's on the steal, can he find the courage to re-raise him?
Well, Jesus can't possibly call this river raise. He could only be good if Giuseppe was calling his turn bet with a complete air ball to bluff the river. To win, he needs to re-raise.
He's called!
Immediately. Well, it's going to be a chop pot.
Whoa, Pantaleo's just mucked!
Giuseppe just forfeited the pot by mucking his hand, and it would have been a chop pot.
Yeah, but you don't think someone's going to be calling you with the same hand, do you?
That's exactly why he mucked.
Here's something that I agree with William Reynolds on. Lizano can't possibly call here, right?
It seems impossible.
He did it. He called.
Did it. He pulled the trigger. He's got to do this knowing that some of the time Pantaleo's just going to throw away his hand like this, so that way the king highs are going to go away and the jack highs are going to go away, right?
Yes. I mean, that has to be what's going on. So let's talk a little bit more about the actual play involved before we get more into that.
Okay.
So Lizano, obviously, he didn't win on the turn when he bet. He wanted to win on the turn, but he had to know that it was unlikely for one bet to work.
Yeah, the plan, I think, always was that he'd probably have to barrel it, like turn and river, because usually when people check back the flop, they can call a turn bet.
Right, and that's what happened. Pantaleo called, although he did not have the hand that Lizano may expect.
Yeah.
So now Pantaleo raises the river, which is his plan all along. It must have been. At least once the turn came, that was his plan.
Well, I think for a lot of rivers anyway. He's probably not going to raise every river, but this is a really good river to raise because it knocks out, Lizano can't bet a flush or isn't going to bet a flush very often on this river.
He may. It's
He might.
possible
He
because Pantaleo's range is not heavily weighted towards queens.
Yeah.
But he does have some queens in his range.
Yeah, but he's not going to bet like pocket nines or pocket eights or pocket sevens anymore. That's for sure, right?
Right. So that being said, Pantaleo can reputably represent a queen here. The way he played the hand, as long as he does sometimes check back top pair on the flop, which I'm going to give him credit for being a guy who does that sometimes.
Okay.
He can credibly represent a queen because, like we talked about on the turn, he would not be raising a queen there.
However,
now that the river has double paired the board, he would be raising a queen.
However, the problem with this raise, and I think why Lizano ultimately somehow finds the miracle call here, is because the only thing Pantaleo can represent credibly is a queen here.
Yeah, that's really the only thing he would ever raise here because his opponent, Lizano, his range is wide open right now. There's a lot less information about Lizano's hand than there is about Pantaleo's based on the way the hand played out, if we're blind to both hands, that is. And Lizano could easily have a queen himself, so Pantaleo, if he had a queen, would sometimes expect to even be chopping.
I mean, I guess he could be repping quad deuces, but whatever, right?
I mean, he's usually betting a set on the flop.
Yeah,
So-
or raising the turn when the club comes and the queen where it looks like Lizano might actually have something. But so it's pretty much a queen or nothing, and he checked back the flop, so he often doesn't have that queen. He sometimes might, but often doesn't.
Right. I mean, I think he can rep a queen. It's just really hard to.
Right. So this raise is tough because while he can have a queen, it's the only thing he can have, and that's why Lizano thinks, I don't think he has it.
Yeah, but calling by Lizano, this might just be a little bit batshit crazy.
This is like I'm going to eat my hat and then my shoe.
I don't know if it's quite there, but really he should be raising here, right? I don't know if this is a good play by Lizano.
I mean, I think he's got to click it back. Okay, the only reason not to do this, and we talk about this on the podcast as well, is if you, Lizano, and you just have seen Pantaleo just throw away his hand on the river when he's called and he's beat. And
Right.
and
If
he's
Pantaleo
bluffing.
is doing this constantly where he's bluffing the river and mucking once he gets called, then maybe it doesn't matter that he has jack high. That Lizano could call with 4 high and happily do that.
And maybe Lizano knows that, so he thinks, well, I get to beat his entire bluffing range even when it's actually ahead of mine because this monkey's just throwing it away, kind of a thing.
I guess it could be something like that. Either way, I think a raise is a far better play.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you think he's bluffing, the click back seems perfect, right? You just make it a little bit more and win every time he doesn't have a queen.
But let's be honest, that's not why it's hand of the week. This is hand of the week because Pantaleo mucks the chop.
How does he do it?
In a huge high-stakes situation where they're very deep in an EPT, he mucks a chop. And, of course, he thinks Lizano can never call with a hand worse than my hand or
It's
equal to my
reasonable.
hand. It's a reasonable thought.
It
but
makes so much sense. I'm sure lots of people have thrown away hands just like this in this spot, but they're always the worst hand. That's the only difference.
I mean, what can you do? You have jack high.
You
You
can't be
lose.
good. You're
But
never good.
This is a great lesson to always table your hand. You never know what might happen in
Yeah.
poker. Like, stuff like this happens, and you have to be prepared for that. You have to be willing to show that you bluff sometimes. Obviously, people know that you bluff. It's not like it ruins Pantaleo's image that he opened jack 8 on the button. That's fine.
I mean, no, they're going to know he bluffed anyway because he just throws his hand away. So they
Right.
know either way. The only thing they get to learn is what his exact two
I
cards
mean, maybe
are.
he's thinking like maybe they'll believe I have 8-9 suited instead, and that's a more reasonable hand to have. But really, that doesn't make any
Whatever.
sense. Jack 8 on the button is fine. He's
Yeah.
deep.
Yeah. I don't
Anyway,
think it gives
it's
anything
just-
away.
I can't believe you mucked the chop.
Oh, I can't believe it went call muck. Like both those actions are kind of unbelievable. But muck much more reasonable than the call, I would say.
Tell you what, it's fun to watch the
If
pain.
you want to hear comments about last week's video, stick around after this.
If you guys want to see another river bluff gone wrong, check out Johnny Lawden versus Ziv Bakar by clicking here.
Also, check out our podcast, our Twitter feed, and make sure you subscribe.
Last week, Davide Katai made a crazy queen high hero call. Here's a little bit of what you guys had to say.
ZekeBoy24 said, I feel like physical tells are a big part of making decisions when your opponent is polarized like this. Katai was watching him so closely and made his decision pretty quickly too, which makes me think he not only made a decision based on betting patterns of Roberto and all the stuff you lads mentioned, but also that he picked up something physical and just went with his gut.
That makes a lot of sense. We did mention that, especially on the podcast. By the way, if you guys don't listen to the podcast, start doing it.
I mean, come on.
I'm watching you. But definitely physical tells play into it, especially for Katai. Katai's like a huge physical tells guy, it seems.
Yeah.
If you just watch him stare people down, you can just tell he's reading their souls.
Yeah, he's doing one of these
Right.
all the time.
Yeah. On a bit of a lighter note, we made a little fun of Jeff Gross last week because he was the commentator in the hand, and he
Yeah.
kind of rambled on about something that happened to him that nobody really cared about.
I mean,
Jeff
Jeff Gross cared.
You guys came to his defense a little bit, and that's fair. Sean Garner said, I think you guys are being a little hard on Jeff Gross. Live streams are much different than packaged television broadcasts, and discussions often naturally digress from the action at hand. If they did nothing but thoroughly break down every hand like you guys do for 8 or 9 hours, it would actually get kind of boring. That's a good point.
I can't disagree.
That said, I'm not actually sure in what context Gross's story would be interesting.
So, you're totally right. Mea culpa there. We messed that up for sure, and we apologize, Jeff Gross.
Sorry, Jeff Gross.
We wish you didn't tell such a boring story, though.